Okay, well, welcome to our fourth lesson for Introductory to Philosophy. And today we're going to be looking at animals. Well, that's one of the topics we'll be looking at. We'll be looking at other topics as well, but first we'll start with animals. So, what kind of animals do we see here in the display? Yeah, in English, we call them lemurs. I think they exclusively live in Madagascar, right?
No, honestly.
No, Madagascar. Madagascar is an island off of the coast of Africa, huge island. Yeah. Anyways, you could double check that. But anyways, there's a lot of them there in Madagascar, if they're not exclusively there. And are they horrible or are they cute?
They're cute.
Okay.
They're so friendly.
Yes.
因为中国有人养。
Oh, okay. They also they can be like a kind of pet. Some people in China use them as pets. Okay. So, anyways, let's move on. So, animals. There's a lot of different views that people have had over the centuries on animals, but the dominant view until recently was that we can kind of do whatever we want with animals. That humans are superior, and therefore, because they're superior, the animals are there to serve humans. You know, so whether they're their pets, whether they're for eating, whether they're for taking their very nice leather skins and using those for clothing or shelter, that the animals are a resource in a sense, similar to how fruits and vegetables and everything else that humans consume are a resource. There's always been a minority of people who have felt that it was morally wrong to eat animals. So you'll find this. Actually, I think some of the earliest the philosophy of vegetarianism comes from like Buddhism, 佛教.
Okay.
Yeah, and also
A little bit like for Islam, they didn't eat pig.
okay. There's some, but they still would eat meat, right?
Yeah,
in
they
general,
eat meat,
yeah.
But they didn't drink alcohol. And
Right.
didn't eat any pig.
Right, and also the Jews also do the same thing like that. Actually, it comes from the same teaching from the Old Testament, actually. But that's a little different because that's just a restriction of what you can eat. It's not saying you can't have any animals. But there hasn't been a strong presence of vegetarianism until very recently. And that's what we call vegetarianism, is when you don't want to eat animals. Do you know what it means, or you do not eat animals, not just don't want to, but you don't eat animals. You avoid eating animals. And people do that for different reasons. Actually, some people don't think it's morally wrong to eat animals. Some people think it's more healthy to not eat animals. Okay? So some people have a belief based on nutrition. Recently, my family and I watched a Netflix. You guys familiar with Netflix? You ever watch Netflix? On Netflix, there was a show on chimpanzees called Chimp Empire.
Oh.
And the chimpanzees mostly eat fruit, but they also eat, guess, what else do they eat?
Chimpanzee.
They eat fruit, lots and lots of fruit, mostly fruit, but they also eat meat.
Chicken.
If they could find a chicken, they might kill it and eat it. They eat all kinds of different animals that are smaller than them. They also eat monkeys.
Chimpanzee.
The chimpanzee will catch a monkey and eat it. Eat the monkey.
I hate monkey.
Did the monkey eat the chimpanzee?
Monkeys don't eat chimpanzees. They're too small. Yeah.
Monkey eat other animals.
The monkey, I don't know. I think there are monkeys that do. It depends on what kind of monkey. I think there are some monkeys that will eat some rodents and things like that. But chimpanzees for sure will eat. And you know, chimpanzees are our closest relatives that are still alive. Like, you know, obviously there were other hominid species and types of, you know, primates that were probably closer to us, but they've all disappeared. But the ones that have continued, the only ones that have continued that are really close, and I mean super close, like 99, I think it's 99%, the DNA is the same, are the chimpanzees. So evolutionarily, we've probably been eating meat. The human species have been eating some sort of meat since, we have evolved. There has been a growing interest in animal experience, and that has been snowballing. And there's also more of a concern for animal suffering. And so here's a question to you. Do animals feel the same pain as we do? Do you think it's the same, physical and emotional? Okay. Here's another question. Are animals different than plants and inanimate objects in terms of feeling their pain? Different than like a stone or a plant? Does a plant feel pain? Maybe not? Not sure, right? What about a stone? Does a stone feel pain?
Stone.
Yeah, no, okay. A building, a desk. Okay, and how do animals differ from humans in how they express their pain? Rene Descartes was a philosopher, very influential philosopher in the Enlightenment period, and he viewed animals and humans. Did he view them as the same or different?
Yeah.
Right. So he thinks they are fundamentally different than humans in terms of the actual physical and spiritual connection. And so he viewed them as different. And so we have this whole thing that humans have souls. So Descartes would say that humans have souls and animals do not. And also his view about the body, and actually any kind of body, his view. What was his view? It was that the body is kind of like a machine. Okay? And and then inside of the body is the soul, and the soul is like a ghost that just kind of dwells inside your body, for the time being. And that was his view. And we call that dualism. We'll get to that in just a little bit. But so what would Descartes think of vivisection? So you know what a vivisection is? So you know what a dissection is when an animal is dead and you actually do an experiment, or you do a dissection, you cut the body open and so on and so forth. You can learn about the body. Is there a problem with doing dissection? Do you think dissection is right or wrong? Vivisections seem totally wrong. It just doesn't seem to be anything right about it. But Descartes wouldn't have thought that there was a wrong thing, because to him, if a species doesn't have a soul, then it doesn't matter what you do with it, and so it justifies kind of animal cruelty. So we have this criticism of Descartes on animal pain. And the criticism is that dualism doesn't seem very plausible. We're actually going to talk about dualism later when we talk about the mind. But for now, we'll just say that there's no way to really test scientifically this idea of the soul and the body having such a complete disconnection. Well, scientifically, I don't think you can really talk about the soul. So I don't know if that's the best way to discuss it. But definitely, if you're basing ideas about what you're going to do with a body, it doesn't seem right, if it's an animal or a human, to base it on this kind of dualism. And even a dualist, though, even if you were a dualist, you could still believe that an animal had a soul. And so then it would be wrong, and that it can feel pain. So it seems like there's too many things that contradict this belief system. But a bigger issue that we have to bring up is really Darwin. And that's that, before Darwin, people really thought of animals in general, and I don't think this is 100% true, but I think in general people thought of animals as being very different. But Darwin showed that humans actually are a kind of animal, that we come from the animal kingdom.
Evolution?
Yeah, so for evolution. And now I think there's other ways to argue based on different worldviews that people have had in the past, that humans did have more of an incorporated view of animals, but this more egalitarian view of animals is more of a recent thing, I believe, and it's mostly through a Darwinian evolution. So people who don't think animals feel pain the same as humans often point to language, and Lydia, you brought this up earlier. It's often thought of that, okay, since animals can't talk, so therefore, they don't actually feel pain the same way we do. But we see when an animal squeals when it's hurt, or a pig squeals, or it squawks really loudly as a bird or something, or makes some sort of pain call. To us, it seems very clear that it's feeling some sort of pain. The other problem with this argument is that what about children who can't speak yet? If a child who can't speak yet is just like, in a sense, like an animal who can't speak, and a child can feel pain, right? And the same thing with people who have disabilities. Some people have their brains are injured and they can no longer speak correctly, or they can't speak at all. They can't communicate. They can't communicate their pain, but we would still believe that those people have pain. One viewpoint comes from what's called utilitarianism. Next week, we're going to be talking about right and wrong, so ethics, and we'll go into what utilitarianism is. But for now, one way to think about it, at least from the point of view of Jeremy Bentham, was that our main goal in ethics should be to maximize pleasure and to minimize pain. And so whatever you do to make that happen must be good. So as long as you're helping people to feel as much pleasure as possible and you're trying to reduce as much pain as possible, then it doesn't matter really what you do. That's kind of the basis of utilitarianism. Of course, it can be formulated slightly different as well. So he claimed that animal suffering, should be included in any moral assessment of how we behave. So therefore, if we're going to maximize pleasure, we need to maximize pleasure for all, including animals. And so decisions about what we're going to do in the world need to involve animals. So he points out that because of language, humans anticipate pain, and therefore we experience greater pain. So one thing is that, so yeah, maybe language does have a part in this, in that, for example, if you're in a prison and you're going to be tortured, and you're sitting there in prison and you know from other prisoners talking about it, from the guards telling you that you're going to be tortured, you have to think about that. And you have anxiety, and that kind of is a kind of pain. And you actually probably will experience the pain of it even more because you're very afraid and you're very tense and this kind of thing. So we can't know for sure, but it seems that because animals can't communicate those things, that their pain only happens in an instant. The pain only happens when the pain is actually being inflicted, whereas humans can have maybe an emotional kind of build-up to that pain. So he would also argue that so if an animal is killed for food, that joy of eating, or that pleasure of eating the meat, or the benefit to mankind in terms of the protein you mentioned, the nutrition that he's getting from, or he or she is getting from the food, would justify killing the animal and eating the meat. Okay? So this is kind of a utilitarianist view on animal pain. But one thing that maybe we would have maybe more agreement on, or we maybe can start to formulate some answers, is that animal welfare. So what does it mean? Well, for example, how should animals be treated? So even if you say, okay, well, we're still going to eat animals, but we don't want to like experiment on them when they're alive. We don't want to do things that are cruel to them. And how should we treat them? So for example, if they are in a farm, so there's a lot of this factory farming, and they take the pigs or the goats or the sheep or the cows, and they put them in really, really crowded spaces. Like they're all stuck to each other basically, and they just get food put basically to their face, and they have to eat, and they go to the bathroom all over the place, and they don't get to walk around. They don't have any fresh air. It's dark. They can't really see much. They're basically just produced just to be able to eat. And so this is factory farming and crowded and confined conditions. And so maybe this we can address and say, okay, well, that doesn't seem right. That doesn't seem right to treat animals in this way. If the animals really do feel pain, maybe this is the wrong way to treat animals. So this leads to another concept, and that is speciesism. Yeah, speciesism is like racism in the sense that, so racism would say, well, my group of people are better than your group of people. And speciesism is the same thing. It's saying that my species is better than your species, right? So somebody who's against that would be an anti-speciesist, just like somebody who's against racism would be an anti-racist. And so this is a term that came up by a guy named Richard Ryder, and here's the quote here from Warburton, as you can read. And you mentioned the self-interests need to come first, and that Homo sapiens are actually have a greater capacity for certain kinds of psychological suffering, maybe. That's what one thing you would maybe use. So this is difficult because it often means when the interests of a non-human animal come in conflict with the human, that an anti-speciesist will still give preference to the human. But this won't be based merely on the human status. Yeah, so it's interesting. So your point of view, you're just saying, you said the human's self-interest comes first before animals, right? Yeah. So this is a speciesist viewpoint. So you're a speciesist. I don't even know if being an anti-speciesist is tenable. I think it's possible to be an anti-racist. I don't think that's. I think you can overcome biases that you have to your own. But as we see, we'll see later why it's so difficult. It would be so difficult to actually be an anti-speciesist, and we'll look at that in a moment. Here's some arguments. Let's first look at the arguments for speciesism. First of all, animals. They would say if you have the view that animals exist for human benefit, right? That's what they're primarily there for. Different people at different times have had this. I think most traditional cultures have this. Because this is written in the Western context, he discusses that this is a Christian point of view. This is mostly because if you look in the Old Testament, there's the story about the creation of humanity, and before mankind falls. This is interesting. Before humanity falls, do you guys know the story of creation from the Christian perspective? The creation. Okay.
Jesus.
Yeah, but this is before Jesus. So this is the same as for Jews and Christians and Muslims. And what happens is God first creates the heavens and the earth, and then he creates the plants. Okay? He creates all the plants. He creates animals next. And what does he create last? So there's 6 days that he creates. What does he create last? No, the very last thing that he creates, God creates. God creates, on the very last day, God creates the humans. Okay? This is the story from the Bible, okay? So after he creates the humans, he says he makes them in his image. So there's something about humans from the point of view of the Bible that's special from all other created things. It's like saying you guys are extra special human beings, and you, man and woman, are made in the image of God. And the image of God is a tricky phrase, so we don't know exactly what that means. Like, so does God look a little bit like me? Like he has a face kind of like me? It probably doesn't mean so much the physical representation. It more has to do with the spiritual similarities, that humans have a spiritual, intellectual, and emotional capabilities that are similar to God's. And not only that, but that they're endowed with these kinds of things to reflect him, and it becomes the basis of kind of society, basis of respect for each other. So that's the Christian view. Now, others besides Christians have had this view as well, in terms of like animals being somehow separate from humans. Like Aristotle would be an example of that. But I think even in Chinese traditional culture, I think the idea is that animals mostly are for the benefit of humans, right? And I think even in Hinduism and Buddhism as well, I think there's been adjustments, people have changed over time, but actual practice, when you actually see human societies in practice, most of them have animals do things for humans, no matter if you treat them well or not. So some arguments also is that animals, just prima facie, when you look at animals, you don't see them respecting each other. Or what do you think? Do you think animals show respect for each other? Will, does the wolf show respect for a mouse?
No.
Right. Yes. Okay. What about does the lion have respect for deer or antelope? Okay. How about does the dog respect the cat? Sometimes, yeah. Sometimes, yeah. Does the cat respect the dog?
We can't
Is the
see
question.
that the animal.
So because there isn't this sense of respect that even animals have within their own species or between them and other species, people say, well then, why then should they have the same respect that we give to each other as humans? And the other argument is animals aren't rational. It should be a rebuttal. Animals aren't rational like humans, and so humans can know better. So do you see what that says? Is that basically, why should an animal respect other animals? Do animals have the same ability to think as humans? Do they have reasoning? Maybe not at the same level. There's some of them, like chimpanzees, actually have some capabilities for reasoning, but not at the same depth and complexity. I think it's pretty obvious, right? I don't see any chimpanzees sitting and using a computer and giving classes on philosophy, right? Like it just doesn't happen. So why then, if they don't have this ability to reason like we do, why do we expect even that they can respect each other? If you don't expect that they can respect each other, then I think we can safely say that this isn't a very good argument for saying that's why we shouldn't be, or that why we should still allow speciesism. Okay? Let's look at this quote from Warburton. Anti-speciesists can point out human beings don't need to eat meat or fish. We can survive well without either, whereas many animals have no choice in this matter. Some people argue on the basis of medical evidence that a well-balanced vegetarian diet is significantly healthier for human beings than one that includes meat. A healthier life is likely to be one of greater happiness and less pain, and one that will make fewer demands on scarce communal resources. So perhaps there are even utilitarian reasons for preferring vegetarianism above meat. This argument is sometimes combined with an ecological one, namely that growing crops is more efficient than rearing animals and produces far less CO2, thereby benefiting everyone. So this is a lot to unpack because it's several different things. But let's look at the first part here. Do some animals, like for example lions or bears, could they just decide to be vegetarian? They can't, right? They have no choice in the matter. They've been evolutionarily designed to be just meat eaters. And some of these animals basically eat no vegetables. So that's fair. That's fair to say. They don't have a choice. We though, as humans, do we have a choice?
Yes.
Can we choose not to eat meat?
Yes.
Okay. Now, that might be true. It might be true that you can function without meat. But I don't know, and this is why he says some people argue, because I don't know if we actually have conclusive evidence. Now, there is some evidence that vegetarian diet is better, and he's saying significantly healthier. But has it been proven? Do you think it's been proven that vegetarian diets are the best diets for human? Has that been proven? Yeah, I don't think it has. Yeah. I don't know. Maybe in the future we can know the answer to that. I think if they have certain kinds of studies. The problem is, do you know what the problem is of why we can't know that for sure yet? Because we can't get all the evidence. Because in order to get that, you need to have controlled experiments. And for nutrition, it's actually almost impossible to have controlled experiments. You need to have controlled somebody's diet from the time they were born, and maybe even before they were born. Maybe it has to start with their mother and her nutrition. And then you'd have to go from that through their birth all the way up to the end of their life. And that's just one person. For science to actually happen, you have to do that for thousands of people to make an actual prediction and a judgment on whether or not this diet was actually the healthy diet. But you'd have to do that with over and over again with repeated groups, and you'd have to do different kinds of diets, like one with meat, one without meat. And so these kinds of longitudinal studies have actually never been completed. Actually, for most things in nutrition, they actually have never been completed, as far as I understand. There's a few things that we know quite certainly, like, for example, sugar is really bad for your body, and tobacco is bad for your body. There's a few things that we can know for sure, but there's not actually, the list is actually very small. So making very conclusive statements about nutrition, I think it's okay to do, because we all have to form opinions, but to just make the assumption based on the evidence that we have now that vegetarian diet is significantly healthier, it's debatable. It's not a fact. It's not something that we can be really, really sure about. So that kind of, to me, that kind of drops that argument. Well, what's the last argument here is an ecological one. And that is that the cows, when cows burp and they fart, they actually produce, fang pi, like a niu fang pi. They actually produce methane. Methane is a kind of gas. It's a greenhouse gas. And greenhouse gases like CO2 is what? Carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide and methane and a few other gases are causing the world to become colder or hotter?
Hotter.
Hotter. Is this true? Are greenhouse gases causing the world to become hotter or warmer? I think it's pretty clear that this is a problem. Like, we're producing too much CO2 and too much other greenhouse gases. And this is a problem, and it needs to be addressed. And I think governments are trying to address these things. So one of the things people are trying to do more electric cars. We're trying to do these things that are causing less CO2. But animals apparently cause more than vegetables. And so this is a question, too, to bring up. I think this would be, for me, more of a significant reason to make a diet switch. But again, it's not 100% sure that we would all have to change our diet to vegetarianism in order to prevent more global warming. I don't think that's conclusive yet. Okay, another argument for speciesism. Do you care more about animals or humans? Is it okay to care more about your own children than to care about other people's children? Let's say I only helped everybody else's child, but I didn't do anything for my own children. Or I did very little. I did less for my own children than I do for other people's children. So this is a process in evolution, right? And but I think part of it is that we wouldn't ever want to encourage people to care about other people's children more than their own children. That would be bad. That would be bad for society. We want people to be selfish in that sense, to really care for their own children. It doesn't mean you have to hate other people's children or be cruel. That's right, because other children have their own parents. And so if we need to take care of our own problems, our own things, the more we actually take care of our own problems, I discovered this as I was becoming an adult, is that the more I take care of my own problems, I'm actually helping everybody else. If I have all kinds of problems all the time, I'm only causing a burden on other people. We have to take care of ourselves. That's a fundamental thing. And it's the same thing with our kids. We have to take care of our kids and then teach them to take care of themselves if we want them to actually contribute to society. So your first step to contributing, so some people want to do so many great things for society. You want to go out and you want to save the world. Well, first start with yourself. First start with trying to save trying to fix your own problems. And you could, so if we favor our own children, why can't we favor, in an analogy, so this is an argument from analogy, why can't we favor our own species' children more than we favor animals? So in a sense, we think of humanity, now expand it to a humanity, and all of humanity's is like our children. Compared to animals, humans would be like our children. And animals would be like other people's children. So what about arguments for the anti-speciesism view? Well, one argument is that animals actually have interests. They have their own interests, right? Others' interests shouldn't be based on abilities, but just on the fact that they have interests. So just because my cat is interested in catching like the birds and different things like that, even if he's not good at catching the birds, he still has an interest. And maybe I should respect that interest. I don't know how I'd exactly respect that interest in particular, but just trying to use... I do have a cat. I'll have to show you guys pictures later. Yeah. One of the arguments for anti-speciesism is that suffering is like a precondition for interests. So you have to be able to experience suffering of some form if you also have interests, and vice versa. So the answer that the anti-speciesist would give is that we shouldn't be doing any experimentation on animals at all. No experimentation and no eating. Okay? And the test would be, would you want your child to be experimented on in this way? And if not, then you wouldn't do that for an animal. So, and the reason is, if an alien came to Earth, they could use the same justification. If it's a species, they could farm humans to use humans for eating and for resources and for work and things like that. The aliens could do that, right? Because they have a justification based on a speciesist worldview. So here's some criticisms of anti-speciesism. Okay, imagine this situation. There's a building that's burning, and inside there's a human child, and inside is also a chimpanzee. And you have to make a decision. Will you save the chimpanzee or the human?
Human.
Human, okay. Yuan, also human. Okay, so what if you decide to save the chimpanzee instead of the human? Is that okay? What if the child is mentally disabled? And so mentally disabled that they're actually not even as smart as the chimpanzee.
Whatever, still human.
Still human. Okay, what about for you? Does that make a difference?
I don't know.
Human, okay. So yeah, for some people that actually can be more of a motivation if they actually have mental disability. Maybe you would even feel more compassion for them. Okay, so this is really interesting because this is actually the problem with anti-speciesism. So I think even in the situation with the pet situation, that doesn't actually fit the anti-speciesist critique or the anti-speciesist line of reasoning. So if we take away the pet part of it, it seems to be most people are either they don't know and they just have to make the decision at the moment, or they would say actually we need to save the child. I think actually most people are going to say we need to save the child, and even if they can't argue why that's the case. So that becomes a real strong critique of anti-speciesism, because if we still are going to favor the child over the animal, then at some point we can't be 100% anti-speciesist. So this is just an argument that goes in that way. Okay, now there's a whole movement that people have gotten into, and it's called the animal rights movement. Now there's all kinds of rights movements nowadays. It's kind of a fun time to live because everybody has their little group of rights that they want to defend, and one of them is the animals. What do you guys think of the animal rights? Should animals have rights? So animals would have to have some sort of obligations. They have to do something. If they are going to have the same rights, then they have to kind of have a way of fulfilling duties that would come with those rights. With great freedom or great power or great whatever, I could say a great number of rights, having rights, comes responsibility. You can't have one without the other. Actually, you basically have summed this up, is that what do rights imply? They imply that there's duties. You have to be capable of taking on responsibilities that go with the rights. You have the capability of acting morally. So for example, we went back to the part about respect, and animals don't seem to have respect for each other. So if we said, okay, animals, we're going to give you the same rights, we're going to give you all kinds of privileges, but then it would seem like, well, then that means that they should probably, if they have animal rights, that means no dog should ever be allowed to bite me. They should agree never to bite another human, right? They should agree, like wild animals would have to not, like, poop on the street, just anywhere. Or something like that. If they're going to have the same right, they have to be able to contribute to society. They have to pay taxes, right, like everybody else does. So if they're going to have the same rights as us, or even different rights, there has to be some things that they would agree to make those rights actually work. But it seems absurd to think that animals should have some sort of duty. Do animals even understand the notion of rights? And do you think animals have language?
Have their own.
They have their own language. Is it a language that humans can study and understand?
Maybe no.
Maybe not. Maybe yes. Well, actually, a lot of study has been done on this, and humans can learn a lot of the patterns of they may not be able to reproduce them, but for example, we know when a whale communicates what a lot of their different calls mean. They've studied chimpanzees, their different calls. But actually, instead of language, we should call this just communication. So language, I will define towards the end of the week. I'm a linguist, and so I have some opinions. I've done a lot of reading on what language is, and we'll talk about that later. But for now, I would say just generally, animals don't have language. They have ways of communicating, and we'll see a distinction of that later on. So is understanding the notion of rights related to language? If you don't have language, can you really articulate what the rights even are? But then this also becomes a problem because there's lots of people who maybe they've gone through a stroke and they can't move anymore and they can't even communicate anymore and they're just laying. We call that vegetative state, 植物人, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, you become like a vegetable. So do they have rights? Do people who are vegetative, do they have rights?
They have rights, but they don't have freedom.
They don't have freedom. Okay, that's a good point. What about children who can't talk yet? Do they have rights?
Yes.
They also have rights. So that can't necessarily, even if animals don't have language, it's not necessarily the basis for saying that they don't have rights. And this is called indirect duties to animals. So those who harm animals are more likely to harm people. Is that true or false? Do you think people who harm animals are more likely to harm humans? Regardless of what we think about this, but if you do think that, then you would have a belief that there's an indirect relationship. So say you say, okay, humans are different than animals. Animals can't have a duty to humans, and we don't have a duty to animals, but we might have somewhat of a duty to animals through an indirect means. And one of the means would be that, so if I'm actually hurting animals, it's corrupting me. It's hurting me. It's hurting my character. And as it destroys my character, it means that I can actually be cruel to other people. And so therefore, I shouldn't hurt animals, because if I hurt animals, it changes me, and then it hurts other people. So we're coming back to the effect it has on other humans, not on the animal, actually. And this was Kant's view. So Immanuel Kant, we talked before, had this kind of view. And so this would be an indirect duty to animals. We have duty to animals indirectly through humans, through other humans. Do you understand this point? Okay. So is it unethical? Is the unethical part of causing pain to animals because of its negative effect on the perpetrator? And that's the question that is being raised here. So the problem with the indirect duties to animal view is that it's implausible. We don't know for sure that when humans are cruel to animals, that it definitely indicates that they will be cruel to other humans. It rests on an unproven empirical claim. Doesn't mean that it can't be proven, and maybe it will be proven at some point. So an example of this is veal farming. Do you guys know what veal is? Veal is a kind of beef, and it's actually from a calf, which is a baby cow. Yeah, so baby cow, you kill the baby cow and you get veal. It's very delicious, very soft. The meat is very good. But in order to do this, in a modern context, not in the past, but in recent years, there's veal farming. And what they do is they have to take the baby cow and they keep it out of the sunlight, so it never sees the sunlight, and it has very little straw, and it's very uncomfortable conditions that usually the baby is in, and then not very long, and then it's killed to be eaten. So whether or not it needs to be killed is one question. The other question, though, that we need to focus on is the environment that the baby cow is being raised. And so the people that have to do that, are they becoming morally corrupted by, that are actually treating these animals, actually treating them in a cruel way, right? They're raising these baby cows this way. Are they going to go and kill people? Are they going to be mean to people? Probably not, right? Because there's a lot of really nice farmers, but they're actually, in a sense, very cruel to animals, even if they're not beating them, but the whole process is actually cruel. The system is cruel. So I do think, just like an aside here, my own personal opinion, I do think people who are cruel to animals, and having fun, that there's something psychotic about that. It's psychopathic, and that person would need help. And I feel like that's very different than veal farming. Some people just like to torture animals, and they have this it's like a sickness. It's a mental sickness. So I don't think that can be equated to the issue with veal farming. Okay, so these are some I didn't give you any answers really to these questions, but it's something to think about. I'm going to stop the video here.